accidentally saw his father who died 40 years ago. Now he saw his father alive in front of him, and most importantly, with the woman he bought. There seems to be a secret between them. Mike was about to ask, but the old rich man unexpectedly fainted. He didn't have time to think about it and rushed his father to the hospital. Looking at his father who was being resuscitated, Mike inevitably had doubts. How did his long-dead father suddenly come back to life? Mary was quietly standing by. Just then, the nurse came over and asked Mike to sign, and asked about the patient's basic condition. But ironically, Mike knew nothing about the father in front of him, even his eating habits, whether he was allergic to medications. He didn't even know the most basic blood type. These questions annoyed Mike. He hated himself for being a stranger to his father. When the nurse left, he stared coldly at Mary, questioning why his father was with him. Seeing that the finger was pointed at her, Mary could only tell the truth. When she saw the rich man at the cemetery, he begged her not to tell anyone, and Mary, as an outsider, had no idea what had happened to the Mac family. I thought that after I finished talking to the old tycoon, and then tell Mike about it, but I didn't expect this to happen now, and Mike didn't lose his cool. He knew he couldn't blame Mary for this. Now he is most worried about the safety of his father. The kind-hearted Mary saw Mike's nervousness, so she went up to him and said, "Although I haven't said much to the old tycoon, but I can see that he really cares about you." He kept repeating that he was most sorry for Mike in his life. Just then, the nurse came out to inform him the patient is out of danger, but he still needs to rest quietly. Mike, who was always cold, showed a hesitant expression at that moment. He didn't know how to be alone with his father since we parted as children. It had been 40 years since we parted as children. Mike didn't understand what had happened in between. Now he wished his father could wake up sooner to give himself a reason. But the only thing Mike knew for sure was that what his mother said at the beginning was not true. There is even reason to suspect that his father's sudden disappearance and his mother have some kind of relationship. Thinking about it, he left the hospital room just in time to see the wallet in Mary's hand. He took a good look. Inside the wallet was a group photo. This was a clear indication that he and his two sisters were in his father's heart. Then he went outside alone, and Mary worried about him. She stayed quietly nearby. Mike didn't expect that at the most difficult time for him, Mary was with him. Looking at Mike's sad face, Mary also involuntarily shed tears, even kindly brought hot water. Although her right hand was injured by Mike, but she still took the initiative to take care of Mike. But at that moment, Mike received a phone call from his mother. The first thing Ruth said was, "Where is she now?" The third sister just came home. She was in a very unstable mood, but Mike already had suspicions about his mother, and did not reveal the news that his father was alive. Considering the situation of the third sister, Mike decided to go home first to see. Before leaving, he uncharacteristically left the phone to Mary, and told her to take care of her father here. If there is any sudden situation, he will inform himself at once. When Mike got home, Ruth was already in the hall, but the way Mike looked at her at that moment, there was a different feeling. Although Mike didn't say much, but Ruth still noticed something unusual. The third sister was still the same as before. Whenever she saw Mike, she would mention her dead sister. Although Mike's heart also felt bad, but he could only try to comfort his sister. However, at this time, Mike would not think. He had left before. His father soon came to his senses. His health was not getting better. The first thing he said when he woke up and saw Mary was, "Is Mike angry with me?" Mary could only try to reassure him that Mike was not angry. On the contrary, he wants you to get well soon. But Rich knew his condition very well. He told Mary to tell Mike as soon as possible. It was important to talk to him. When Mike received the news, he rushed to the hospital. Although he didn't thank Mary in person, but it was easy to see from Mike's behavior, has gradually developed trust in Mary, and so he stayed in the hospital room. And Rich finally woke up again. He said, "Don't be angry with me, son. I've given everything for you." But this made Mike feel confused. Rich explained that although you can't see me, but all these years I never left. Witnessed you grow up little by little. This took Mike by surprise, but he soon returned to normal, asking what all this is about. But just as Rich was about to say it, the accident happened again. The 100 billionaire's father, who died 40 years ago, suddenly came back to life. But just as he was about to meet his father, the father collapsed from a heart attack. When faced with the parting of lives and deaths, the tycoon even hoped to use $100 billion of assets to exchange for his father's health. But luckily, the operation went well, but not out of danger yet. The always cold and domineering CEO. At this moment, he was like an aggrieved child. But Mary saw this scene. He knew that Mike was very nervous. He followed him every step of the way, no matter how much Mike had tormented her. But for Mary, she had lost both parents as a child. She knew how important a father was to a child. With that in mind, Mary found the courage to go up to Mike and comfort him, and at the same time, she told him an important piece of news. While Mike was away at the hospital, the old rich man had said something like this, "Someone doesn't want me to live." Now Mike was a bit anxious. He asked his father what else he had said. This time Mary didn't hide anything. Said the rich man only said this sentence, and this again deepened Mike's suspicion. Immediately decided to go home to see his mother. To Mary's great surprise, this time Mike did not let her walk back on foot. He even agreed to let her sit in the passenger seat, although Mike did not want to admit it. But in the last few days, he had grown to trust Mary. Not only that, he even strapped her in himself. In fact, Mike wished Mary had nothing to do with the death of his second sister, but he didn't show it. When he returned to the mansion, Mike told Mary in a perverse way, "You just wait outside. Don't be afraid no matter what you hear later." And the reason he came back to Ruth is to verify the suspicion in his mind. Why was he so sure of his father's accidental death back then? Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and said, "I want to change the location of my father's grave." And Ruth showed a hint of nervousness, but then she returned to normal. "Why do you suddenly have such an idea?" Not knowing that it was just a test for Mike, he noticed Ruth's Mike's hands were folded. This is standard nervous behavior. Mike struck while the iron was hot. He had recently planned to move, and then he turned to leave. But this test by Mike also aroused Ruth's alarm. While Mike was away, she sent for the housekeeper alone. She told him to keep an eye on him 24 hours a day, and instructed him no one should know about what happened back then, especially not Michael. The same way Mike was suspicious of him. This seemingly harmonious family. How many secrets are hidden behind the scenes? But the irony is, in such a difficult time for him, Mary was the only one who stayed by his side. However, before the two of them left, the housekeeper sneaked up behind them. On the way back to the hospital, Mary had not closed her eyes for 2 days and nights. Inevitably, she was a little tired. Mike looked at Mary, afraid she would get cold, and turn on the air conditioning. But when Mary woke up, Mike acted as if nothing was wrong again. When they got back to the hospital, they found out that their father was still awake. Now all they could do was wait. But what Mike didn't notice was that the housekeeper had followed him to the hospital. Then he called Ruth, although he didn't know who was in the hospital. But from the way Mike was acting, the person inside is very important to him. The words shocked Ruth completely. Thinking about what Mike had just said to him, he seemed to have guessed something. Ruth ordered the butler to keep an eye on Mike. He now left for the hospital. The old tycoon still hadn't awakened. Mary had to stay here with Mike to keep his spirits up. This scene was just seen by Mike. He was a little touched, but he still pretended not to care and said, "You should sit down and rest." These seemingly cold words in Mary's ears, but there is a different feeling. He looked at Mike secretly. When Mike looked at her, Mary hastily averted her eyes again. Then an old man came from the hospital. When Mike thought his father had died, often went to the old man's store to play. As they spent more time together, the two became more like father and son. Whenever Mike was in a bad mood, would go to the old man's store to sit. And this time, his father came back from the dead. Mike could not believe the people around him. Can only tell him his doubts. For Mike to doubt his mother's approach. The old man also very much agreed. But as an elder, he had one word of advice for Mike to prepare for the worst. Maybe you've been living a lie since you were a child. While the two men were talking, Mary brought a glass of water. Looking at the beautiful girl in front of him, the old man thought it was Mike's girlfriend. But before he could say anything, the nurse came out to inform the old rich man that he had awakened. Now Mike could meet him, but just as he walked into the room, but he hadn't expected Ruth to be in the hospital. Looking at his sick father, Mike rushed to reassure you that you're going to be okay, Dad. But Rich knew his own health very well. He knew he didn't have much time left. He said to Mike, "I've done nothing wrong in my life. I haven't done anything wrong. Maybe the only thing I did wrong was to have loved your mother. I had no choice back then. They gave me only one solution, and that was to die quietly. That's the only way to keep you safe." And by now Ruth had walked to the door. The rich man was about to continue. Ruth pushed in the door. Looking at her husband who had come back from the dead, Ruth was not only not happy at all. Instead, her face was filled with horror. He doesn't live in a luxury villa. Instead, he stays in the cemetery every day. His father, who had been dead for 40 years, suddenly appeared in front of him. This was a great thing, but the mother was not the least bit happy. Instead, she showed a frightened expression. This scene was all seen by Mike, but what he never expected was his father's condition worsened again. While he was being resuscitated, Ruth was ready to leave, but Mike was already sure of what he thought. All this has nothing to do with the mother. The main thing is, she did lie about her father's death back then. And here he stopped talking. Ruth was not needed here at the hospital. When he gets home, the two of us will settle this score. For Mike, the most important thing now is that his father is safe, but reality is often harsh. Even though the hospital did its best to save his life, but there was nothing they could do. The rich man's illness was built up over many years. If he had received treatment earlier, it would not be like this today. So there wasn't much time left for Mike. Mary saw all of this in her eyes, but after all, she was an outsider. She could only stay by his side. Looking at the distraught Mike, the rich man was ready to go. He said the most regretful thing in his life is that when Mike was small, he did not spend more time with him. If he had been given another chance to choose, he would not have left Mike back then. But now it's too late to say anything. Looking at his son who has grown up, Rich told him again and again that the past is in the past. Don't think about revenge after I leave. I want you to live a happy and prosperous life. Obviously, in his heart, he didn't want to see Mike and Ruth turn against each other, so he didn't tell the truth about that year. So Mike lost his father once again, and Mary looked at the scene before her and couldn't do anything about it. She knew it was a big blow to Mike. When Mike returned to the mansion, Ruth looked at his cold expression. She guessed what had happened. When the news of the rich man's death came, Ruth was a little shocked, but soon returned to normal. Mike, on the other hand, kept repeating, "Why did you lie to me back then?" Ruth seemed to be thinking of an excuse. In the face of Mike's repeated questions, Ruth said that it was for your own good. Father is not a good person. He did something wrong to me back then. I found out about his relationship with the maid. As a punishment, your father offered to do it, to disappear from this place from now on. But how can Mike believe such an excuse?